The first thing people noticed about Dr. Ava Morgan was how young she looked. In the glass reflection of the lobby doors, she could have passed for a resident on her first week, not a neurosurgeon walking into Lone Star Military Medical Center on a Tuesday morning. The Texas sun flooded the entrance hall, bleaching the floor tiles a hard white. It picked out the lighter strands in her dark hair, pulled into a no-nonsense knot at the nape of her neck, and caught on the thin silver chain that disappeared beneath her scrub top. Her ID badge read Morgan Ava E., attending neurosurgeon. Most people did not look that far down. She walked with a clipped, efficient stride, sneakers whispering against the polished floor. The air smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. Somewhere above her, a helicopter thumped toward the landing pad, the vibration running down through the ceiling tiles and into her bones. Her left hand found the small weight in her coat pocket and curled around it. The metal was cool familiar. Dog tags' edges worn smooth by time and fingers. She pressed her thumb into the stamped letters once, then let go and kept walking. Outside the staff lounge, she heard them before she saw them. "That her?" a man's voice asked quietly. "The new neurosurgeon." Another voice older. "The Navy one. They pulled her in quick. Must have had an excellent interview." A pause, a chuckle. "She looks like she should still be in med school." Ava shifted her chart to the other hand and pushed the door open with her shoulder. The conversation died in the stale coffee air. Two attendings she had met only by last name were standing by the machine, styrofoam cups in hand. They straightened almost in unison. "Morning, Dr. Morgan," one of them said. His smile was polite, almost apologetic. "Morning," Ava replied. She moved to the counter, poured herself black coffee, and pretended not to notice the sideways glances toward her bare left ring finger, toward her smooth forehead, toward the navy blue lanyard clipped to her badge. Behind her, one of the men spoke under his breath, just low enough that he might have thought she would not hear. "How much cranial work can you have done by 30? The other man made a non-committal sound somewhere between agreement and caution. Ava took a sip of coffee. It was burnt metallic. She swallowed it anyway. In the sixth-floor conference room, the fluorescent lights hummed. 20 chairs circled a long table, each with a folder and a printout waiting in front of it. The room smelled faintly of dry erase marker and old paper. "All right, let's start with the aneurysm in ICU 2, Dr. Richard Cole said. He was the opposite of Ava in every visible way. Late 50s hair, almost white at the temples lines, carved deep around his eyes from years of concentration and not enough sleep. His name was on more plaques and journals than most people in the room had read. On the screen, a CT angiogram shimmered into view. Cole summarized the case and clipped practice sentences. When he invited suggestions, the room went quiet in the way rooms do when people are waiting for someone else to speak first. Ava felt the familiar itch at the back of her mind, the mental map aligning. "If we approach through a smaller keyhole," she said, "we can minimize brain retraction. It might reduce the risk of post-op deficits given where the aneurysm neck sits." Heads turned toward her, some curious, some skeptical. Cole looked at her over the rims of his glasses. "Dr. Morgan," he said, his tone even, "our standard approach has served us well for a long time. These are not civilian vanity cases. We do not experiment on brainstem aneurysms." Ava nodded once. "It is not an experiment," she said. "The angle is favorable. We would need only a slight modification of the corridor." Cole raised a hand, cutting off the rest of her sentence. "I appreciate your enthusiasm," he said. "For now, I suggest you spend some time in our ORs, learn our protocols, see how we do things here. Once you are familiar with our procedures, we can revisit your proposed alternatives." Around the table, pens scribbled notes. A few smiles flickered at the edges of mouths there and gone. "Understood," Ava said. She reached for the folder in front of her, opened it, and began jotting down her own notes in a small black notebook she kept tucked inside. Her handwriting was small and precise, tightly packed like she was trying to fit more into each line than it could reasonably hold. She wrote ICU 2, neck angled superiorly, consider keyhole variant if standard fails. Then in the margin, she drew a tiny 3-line pattern and shaded the middle one the way she always did, when she was thinking her way through a problem. 1, 2, 3. The first case she scrubbed in on at Lone Star was not dramatic. A pituitary tumor routine by the department's standards. A senior attending led the team. Ava stood across, assisting the microscope, humming softly as the surgeon navigated the narrow corridor toward the cellar region. The OR lights warmed her shoulders. The air was dry and cool. The smell of cauterized tissue was sharp in her nose. "More suction," the lead surgeon said. "No, not there, deeper." A small vessel tore as his instrument nudged it. A sudden dark bloom of blood filled the field on the monitor, obscuring the delicate structures beneath. "Damn it," he muttered. The scrub nurse shifted. The anesthesiologist glanced at the monitor, then at the vitals, watching for change. Ava took half a breath. "Retractor 2 millimeters lateral," she said quietly. "Pack with cottonoid here. The bleed is off axis. You can tamponade without losing your line." The surgeon glanced up at her eyes narrowed behind his loupes. He made the adjustment exactly as she had described. The blood slowed, then stilled. The anatomy came back into view. "There we go," he said, his voice brightening. "See, this is why you have to respect these angles." He went on narrating the procedure for the benefit of the residents. No one mentioned Ava. She did not expect them to. Across the table, Nurse Lily Park flicked her gaze up at Ava for half a second. Their eyes met over the drape. Lily's look held a quick spark of acknowledgement before she turned back to her instruments. When the tumor was finally removed and the closure completed, the attending peeled off his gloves with a practiced snap. "Good work, everyone," he said already halfway through the door. Ava stayed behind to help Lily transfer instruments, hands moving automatically as her mind replayed the case in her own internal shorthand. Bone opened at 10:22, bleed at 10:51, correction at 10:52, closure at 11:38. In the locker room later, the noise of the hospital dimmed to a dull hum. It was always quieter in here. The walls were painted a tired beige, the benches scarred by years of use. The metallic clang of locker doors echoed sharply. Ava opened her locker. Inside a neatly folded navy t-shirt sat, on the top shelf, the blue faded from too many washes. Her hand brushed it before she reached for the dog tags hanging on the inside hook. She let them fall into her palm. The stamping was still clear. Morgan Ava E. O. Neg Navy. She closed her fist around them. For a moment, the fluorescent locker room lights blurred, replaced by another kind of brightness, harsher and yellow. Canvas walls. The rattle of distant gunfire. A generator coughing to life. A voice shouting for more gauze. The phantom noises slid away. The locker room returned. Ava slipped the chain back over her head and tucked the tags beneath her scrub top against her skin. The metal warmed quickly with her body heat. In the afternoon, she walked a conceal down to radiology. The corridor outside the imaging suites opened onto a long window that overlooked the landing pad. A gust of wind rattled the glass. A helicopter swept in low rotors, chopping the air into a physical force that vibrated through the concrete. Dust and bits of debris skittered across the tarmac. The rising whine of the engine wound high, then settled as the aircraft lowered itself onto the pad. Ava stopped for half a second, her hand on the window frame. The sound was nothing special in a place like this. At bases overseas, it had meant inbound casualties, a sleepless night, the smell of blood and jet fuel braided together. Here it was an afternoon medevac from some training accident 2 states over. Her fingertips tapped 3 times against the metal frame. 1, 2, 3. The helicopter's engine whirled down. Medics in green and blue hurried out to meet it, pushing gurneys into position. From where she stood, Ava could not make out faces, only movements that practiced urgency. "Dr. Morgan." She turned. A resident with a stack of films in his hand stood behind her, looking slightly lost. "They are ready for you in city," he said. "Coming," Ava answered. She took one last look at the landing pad, then stepped away from the window and followed him down the corridor. The dog tags, a quiet weight against her chest. Her steps matching the faint echo of rotor beats that still trembled in the glass behind her. The call came in on a Thursday morning just after Ava finished rounds in the neuro step-down unit. She was updating a note outside a patient's room when the overhead speakers crackled to life. The voice that came through was tight and fast, fighting to sound composed. "Attention all trauma and neurosurgical personnel, report to emergency department. Incoming military medevac critical. Repeat, incoming military medevac critical." The hallway paused. Conversations thinned mid-sentence. A nurse froze with a medication tray in her hands, then pivoted toward the elevators. A respiratory therapist abandoned a half-finished chart at the workstation and set off at a jog. Ava capped her pen and slipped it into her pocket. The computer screen still glowed with an unfinished sentence. She logged out with 2 quick taps and started down the hall, her stride lengthening. The elevator was too slow. She took the stairs. By the time she reached the emergency department, the air felt charged. Monitors chimed out of sync, ventilators, side stretchers rattled in and out of bays. The smell of antiseptic was sharp enough to taste. At the far end of the main corridor, a cluster of uniforms gathered. Hospital administrators in suits, trauma attendings in navy blue scrubs, a handful of officers from the base across town. Conversation layered over itself, urgent and low. Ava spotted Nurse Lily near the triage desk, eyes wide. "What happened?" Ava asked. Lily looked up. "Cargo plane," she said. "Training sortie coming back from Louisiana. Something went wrong on approach. They put her down hard outside San Marcos." Ava felt a faint cold press against her chest. "Plane down Texas, scrub hot metal burning. How many on board?" she said. 6 crew, 1 4-star, Lily swallowed. "General Nathan Reed. They are still working him in the Rhesus Bay." Ava had never met Reed, but she knew the name. Everyone who had spent time near an airfield knew the name. Reed was the kind of officer they still put on recruiting posters when they wanted people to believe the sky belonged to them. Who called for neurosurgery? Ava asked. Nobody yet, Lily said. But radiology has already flagged his scans to your service. Cole is in the consult room with the others. Ava nodded and moved toward the glassed in-room at the side of the department where multidisciplinary meetings happened when something big rolled through. The door was half open. Inside, the lights were dimmed so the images on the wall screen stood out. A CT scan of a head filled the display, black and white and dense with detail. Even from the doorway, Ava could see the fractures. The skull looked like a cracked bowl. Blood pooled where it should not be. Midline shift, brain pressed against its own boundaries. Around the table, 8 surgeons sat or stood. Ava recognized faces from the neurosurgery roster, from trauma, from vascular. Dr. Cole stood near the screen, arms folded, his white hair, catching the blue light from the monitor. The impact must have been massive, someone said. Pilot reports he tried to belly land it. From the looks of this, Reed ate the instrument panel. Intracranial pressure is probably already through the roof. Ava stepped just inside the door and stayed near the corner, letting her eyes move from image to image as the scan advanced. Each slice told the same story. Fractured temporal bone, diffuse subarachnoid bleed, contusions everywhere she looked. This is not operable, a trauma surgeon said flatly. We are not talking about a single lesion. This is the entire cranial vault compromised. The minute you open, you will lose what little hemodynamic stability he has left, another added. He coded in the field, someone else said. They brought him back, but he is hanging by a thread. Ava glanced at the vitals displayed on a secondary screen. Blood pressure barely holding. Heart rate high and thready. Ventilator doing all the work. Could we place an ICP monitor, at least reduce some pressure, a younger attending ventured. Cole shook his head. An invasive monitor is only useful if you have a plan to intervene, he said. We would be monitoring the collapse in high definition. A hollow little laugh fluttered around the room, more reflex than humor. The hospital commander stood at the back, arms behind his back, expression carved stiff. We are talking about General Reed, he said for clarity, as if anyone had forgotten. The Secretary of Defense is already on the line. If there is anything we can reasonably attempt, we need to consider it. Cole nodded, once eyes still on the scans. I understand the stakes, Colonel Sisek. He said. Which is exactly why I'm saying this. This is not a survivable pattern of injury. In my judgment, attempting a craniotomy would be futile. At best, he dies on the table. At worst, he dies on the table after 4 hours of heroic but meaningless effort. The words sat heavy in the air. Neurosurgery as a service cannot recommend operative intervention, Cole finished. One by one, the other neurosurgeons murmured agreement. Some looked away from the screen as they did, unable to hold the image and the decision in their minds at the same time. Ava felt her jaw clench. There was nothing wrong with their logic. The damage was extensive. The probabilities leaned hard in one direction. Her hand drifted to her pocket and closed around the dog tags, canvas walls, yellow light, the stink of diesel from a generator. A young corporal with half his face swollen from an explosion, the pupil already blown, someone shouting that they should just move on. He is gone, Ma, and we need that table for the ones we can still save. She remembered the way her own voice had sounded that night. We do not leave him on the floor because it is easier for us. Cole turned from the screen. If anyone has a differing opinion, he said now is the time. The room was quiet. A clock on the wall ticked audibly, marking seconds that did not care whose name was on the scan. Ava stepped forward. I do, she said. 8 heads swiveled toward her. Cole's brows lifted slightly. Dr. Morgan, he said, you have reviewed the images. I have, Ava said. And you still believe this is an operable case? I believe it is a case where surgery is the only chance he has to do more than die slowly in an ICU bay, she said. The trauma surgeon nearest her frowned. With respect, you are new to this hospital, he said. We have all seen patterns like this. You open that skull, he arrests before you can even get control. I have seen patterns like this, Ava answered. She kept her voice level. The last time I was in a tent 5 miles from a live fire engagement. Our suction jammed twice, the generator went out in the middle of the case. We kept that soldier alive anyway. Cole watched her carefully. You were operating as a field surgeon, Xiao, he said. This is not a combat support hospital. This is a stateside military center with standards of practice. Exactly, Ava said. Which means here I actually have a functioning operating room, a full team, stable power. I'm not claiming there is a high chance of success. I am saying there is a chance, as without surgery there is not one. The hospital commander shifted his weight. What would you need, he asked. A room in neurosurgical OR immediately, Ava said. Full intracranial setup, my choice of scrub nurse and assisting resident, Blood products ready, anesthesia prepared for pressure swings. And if he dies on the table, the commander said. Ava held his gaze. The tags in her pocket felt heavier than their few grams of metal. Then we sign the paperwork, she said, and we document that we did not watch a 4-star suffocate under his own blood without lifting a scalpel. Cole's jaw tightened. This is not about his rank, he said. If this were an unknown private, the calculus would be the same. I know, Ava said. I would fight just as hard for a private. Some of the tension in Cole's shoulders shifted into something else harder to name. Your experience in the field is, he said slowly, it is not the same as running an academic neurosurgical service. It taught me to make decisions when nothing about the situation is clean, Ava replied. I'm not asking you to scrub with me. I'm asking you not to stand in my way. The room held its breath. The commander looked from the scans to Cole, then to Ava. Dr. Cole Kike, he said, as head of neurosurgery, would you forbid this operation if Dr. Morgan is willing to take responsibility for it? For a moment, Cole did not answer. In the silence, the beeping of a monitor from a nearby trauma bay bled through the door. A siren wailed faintly outside, then faded. I will not forbid it, Cole said at last. I will not endorse it either. If Dr. Morgan proceeds, it is her case, her name, her call. He turned his gaze to Ava. Do you accept that? He asked. Ava thought of 6 soldiers on stretchers lined up against a canvas wall of a radio screaming for them to evacuate, of the way the sand had tasted in her teeth when she stepped outside afterward and realized the sky was still there. I do, she said. The commander nodded once, decisive. Prep an OR, he said to the charge nurse standing in the doorway. Notify anesthesia. Dr. Morgan will operate. The nurse hurried off. The group began to disperse, some shaking their heads, some already reaching for phones and pagers. Cole stayed where he was. As Ava turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Dr. Morgan, he said. She faced him. You understand that if this goes badly, it will follow you, Cole said. There are people in this building who are already inclined to question your appointment. An intra-operative death of this magnitude will give them something concrete to point to. Ava felt the old calm settle over her. It always came when the choices narrowed to one thin line. With respect, sir, she said, if I walk away from that man now because I'm worried about my reputation, I do not deserve the appointment. Cole studied her a heartbeat longer, then inclined his head a fraction. Scrub well, he said. In the hallway, Ava picked up her pace toward the elevators that led to the surgical floor. Her palms were suddenly damp. She wiped them on the sides of her scrubs, then reached into her pocket and closed her fingers around the dog tags once more. The metal was no longer cold. It was warm from being pressed against her earlier that day, shaped to the curve of her hand. In the stairwell, she took the steps 2 at a time. At the landing between floors, a narrow window offered a view of the landing pad. The helicopter sat there, rotor-stilled medics already gone. The tarmac still showed faint scuffs where gurney wheels had scraped it. A trail of dried mud marked the path from the aircraft door to the ambulance bay. Ava tapped her fingertips against the window frame. 1, 2, 3. Then she turned away and climbed the last flight, heading for the scrub sinks and the bright, unforgiving lights of the operating rooms. The scrub sinks along the wall of the surgical wing gleamed under the overhead lights. Water hissed steadily, running in narrow sheets down stainless steel. Ava opened a faucet with her elbow. Warm water slid over her forearms, carrying away the dry hospital air and replacing it with something sharper. She picked up a scrub brush and began to work methodically from fingertips to elbows, each stroke measured. 1, 2, 3. She counted in her head, not out loud. The ritual steadied her breathing. Soap bit at the thin skin over her knuckles, turning the ridges pale. Beside her, Javier Ortiz scrubbed in silence. The resident kept stealing glances in her direction and then looked away when she met his eyes. You do not have to stay for this, Ava said. I know, Javier replied. I want to. Their voices were calm, but the room could feel the pressure waiting on the other side of the swinging doors. When they finished, a circulating nurse held open the door with her hip. Cool filtered air washed over them as they stepped into neurosurgical OR3. The room had already been prepared. The operating table sat centered under a halo of white light, the overhead lamps focused and bright. Stainless steel carts lined one wall covered with blue sterile drapes. The anesthesia machine hummed softly, lines already in place. Bags of blood waited on a nearby stand, red and heavy. General Nathan Reed was already there. He looked smaller without the uniform. He lay motionless, head-shaved in a rough arc where the trauma team had worked to stabilize him. Someone had marked the areas of fracture with a felt pen lines crossing his scalp like a crude map. His eyes were closed. A ventilator breathed for him, making his chest rise and fall in a steady rhythm that was not his own. Ava walked to the head of the table. For a moment she just stood and looked at him. The last time she had seen a rank that high in person, it had been on a visit to a forward operating base. That general had shaken hands in the tent where she worked, asked quick questions, nodded at rehearsed answers. Then he had left, and the wounded had kept coming. Dr. Morgan. The anesthesiologist looked up from the head of the table. His name tag read, Singh. Blood pressure is marginal but holding, Singh said. We have him as stable as he is going to get. Once you start, we will be riding a line. Ava nodded. Thank you, she said. Let me know the second he drifts. She looked to Lily, who was already in full sterile gown, her eyes above the mask alert. You have everything you asked for, Lily said. Microscope drill clips, bipolar extra suction, and a second backup on the suction just in case. Good, Ava said. At the edge of her vision through the glass of the observation window, she could see figures gathering in the gallery. Dark shapes behind reflective glass. Dr. Cole stood among them, hands behind his back, face unreadable. Ava did not raise her eyes to meet his. She did not need his approval. She knew he was there. She stepped into position at the head of the table. Time out, Lily said clearly, her voice cutting through the quiet. She read off the checklist. Patient Reed Nathan James. Procedure emergent decompressive craniotomy with evacuation of hematomas. Surgeon Dr. Ava Morgan. The team confirmed each point. When they reached the final line, all eyes turned to Ava. Anything to add, Doctor? Lily asked. Ava let her hand fall briefly to her pocket, feeling the outline of the dog tags through the thin fabric of the scrub pants, then removed it and brought it back up into the sterile field. None, she said. We begin. Lily placed the scalpel into her gloved hand. The handle felt familiar, heavier than it looked. The first incision traced a gentle curve along Reed's scalp. Blood welled along the line bright and thick. Ava moved with careful pressure, cutting through layers without rushing. The room narrowed to the circle of skin, her hands the sound of the ventilator and the soft beeps of the monitor. Once the scalp was reflected, she picked up the drill. The high whine of the bit into bone. Fine white dust collected under the cutting edge, mingling with small beads of blood. 4 burr holes, careful even spacing. Javier held the retractor as instructed, his shoulders tense but steady. Relax your grip a little, Ava said quietly. Let the instrument do the work. Yes, doctor, Javier replied. With the burr holes complete, she connected them, lifting away a section of skull like the lid of a box. The brain beneath did not look like the clean illustrations in textbooks. It bulged, swollen, the surface tense and glistening. Dark red clots pressed against the dura. The tissue had nowhere left to go. Pressure is ugly, Lily murmured. Ava felt it in the resistance as she carefully opened the dura. Blood surged up, eager to escape the confines of bone and membrane. Extra suction, she said. A second suction catheter appeared in her field. She worked in concert with Lily, one hand controlling the sucker, the other guiding gentle irrigation, clearing the field enough to see. On the monitor, the brain pulsed with each heartbeat, though the rhythm was ragged. Some areas were pale and bruised, others drowned in blood. This is the whole vault, she heard Cole say in her memory. Not a single lesion. She focused on the largest clot first, a thick collection of dark blood pressing against the temporal lobe. Each fragment she removed lessened the tension a fraction, like easing a too tight band. Above in the gallery, Cole leaned forward. The other physicians were quiet. Minutes stretched into patterns of movement. Irrigate, suck, lift, clip. She spoke little, issuing short instructions. Turn the head 5 degrees, drop the table. Light a bit closer. An hour into the case, Singh's voice drifted up from beyond the drape. Blood pressure trending down, he said. 90/50, heart rate is up. Keep me posted, Ava answered, eyes still on the field. She was working near a deeper bleed now, navigating between delicate vessels that had already been bruised by the impact. A careless movement here could change deficit into catastrophe. The monitor began to chime at a faster pace. The beeps climbed higher like a warning song. Singh called out new values. 80/40, heart rate 130. Sweat collected at the back of Ava's neck. The lights were hot on her shoulders. The mask trapped her breath, making the air in front of her mouth thick and warm. Give him a push, Singh said to his team. Start a unit. The blood pressure stabilized for a moment, then slipped again. 70/30. A small artery near the deep clot began to ooze. It was not dramatic, but it blurred the borders of the field. Field, Ava said, and both suction tips dove in together, clearing the view. Above, Cole watched the numbers on the side monitor with the practiced eye of someone who had been in this position many times. He could see the path the case was taking. He knew how quickly things could turn. She is going to lose him, one of the other surgeons said under his breath. On the table, Reed's chest still rose and fell with the vent, but the rhythm of his heart on the monitor grew erratic. The beep staggered, then raced, then dropped off. That stutter in the sound had a memory attached to it. Ava heard it in 2 places at once. In OR3, under the bright lights and in a tent with canvas sides billowing in dusty wind, where a young sergeant's heart had done the same uneven dance under her hands. In Helmand, the generator had coughed and the lights had flickered while she tried to clamp a bleeding vein. The monitor had gone dark, leaving only the feel of the pulse under her fingers to guide her. Here, everything was measured, everything was visible. That did not make the stakes smaller. Rhythm is unstable, Singh said. He is flirting with a crash. A nurse near the back of the room shifted her weight, the soft squeak of her shoe loud in the hush. Prepare the defibrillator, Ava said. Bring the paddles in and place them. Do not discharge until I tell you. Someone moved to obey. The plastic cart rattled as it was wheeled closer. She did not step back from the cranial field. Doctor, Javier whispered, trying and failing to keep the fear out of his voice. If he arrests, should we close and switch to chest compressions? Ava did not look up. If he arrests, we do what we need to do, she said. Right now what we need to do is clear this clot and give his brain room to swell without killing him. On the monitor, the QRS complexes stretched became stranger. The audible beep lost its regular phrasing. V-Tatch, Singh called. Charging. Stop, Ava said sharply. Not yet. She could feel the thump of her own heartbeat in her throat. Her fingers did not shake. They moved with the same economy they always had in the field, when the noise outside the tent had been louder than this alarm. The bleeds she had targeted were almost completely cleared. The brain still looked injured mottled, but the bulge had softened a little. The midline was less skewed. Come on, she murmured, though whether to read or to his heart she could not have said. The monitor let out a long, flat tone. In the gallery, someone cursed under their breath. Down in the room, the sound hit like a slap. Loss of pulse, Singh said. He is in arrest. Everyone in the room turned to Ava. Time did not stop, it stretched. Begin chest compressions, Singh said automatically to the circulating nurse, already moving to climb onto the stool at the side of the table. No, Ava said. Her voice cut across the room. It was not loud. It did not have to be. I will do compressions here, she said. You focus on drugs and airway. Lily, keep the field covered, but do not let it flood. Javier, palms flat on the retractors. Do not lose our plane. Doctor, you cannot do both, Singh said. You will exhaust yourself. I have done both before, Ava answered. On worse nights than this. She handed off her instrument, placed her gloved hands on Reed's sternum, and began compressions. The sound was different from the models in training. Real bone and cartilage gave under pressure with a faint creak. Each push drove blood through vessels that had already been stretched and bruised. She counted under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The defibrillator pads were already on his chest. A nurse watched the monitor, hand hovering near the charge button. Charge to 200, Singh said. On my mark. Wait for my count, Ava said. Her arms burned. The table was at an awkward height for good leverage, but she kept going pace steady. Charging, Kishore. Nay? Yeah, the nurse said. The machine whined up to level. The ready tone chimed. Ava lifted her hands a fraction. Clear, she called. The shock jolted Reed's body. His muscles jumped, then fell still. They all looked at the monitor. The line trembled, then settled back into flatness. Again, Singh said. Charge to 200. Another round of EPI. Ava placed her hands back on the sternum. The plastic under the drape was slick with sweat and antiseptic. She pressed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Her shoulders ached. Her palms hurt. None of that mattered. Clear, she said when the tone chimed again. The second shock snapped through him. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then a small blip appeared. And another. The flat line gave way to a thin, slow rhythm, weak but there. We have a pulse, the nurse said, disbelief in her voice. Weak but present. Keep compressions off now, Singh said. Let us see if he holds it. Ava stepped back from the chest, lungs burning from exertion. Sweat had collected under her cap. She could feel it sliding down her temples. She turned back to the head of the table. Back to work, she said. Her voice was hoarse, but it held. Javier looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he adjusted his hold on the retractors, his jaw set. The field was still there waiting. The brain did not care about drama. It needed space. Ava took the instruments Lily handed up. Her hands found their rhythm again. She moved faster now, but not rushed, making each cut and placement count. She evacuated the last of the major clot, checked the deep corners for hidden pockets of blood, then began to control the smaller oozes that would, if ignored, undo everything. Every few minutes, Singh read out the numbers. The blood pressure inched upward. The heart rate settled into a more regular pattern. Ventilator settings remained high but stable. In the gallery, some of the observers sat down without realizing. The tension had shifted. It was still there, but it had changed shape. An hour and a half later, the brain looked less crowded. It was still swollen and bruised, but the midline had almost returned to where it should be. The surface rose and fell gently with each heartbeat. Ava laid a thin patch of synthetic material over the dura bridging gaps. where the membrane had been too damaged to close completely. She secured it with small sutures, each knot tight. "Are you leaving the bone off?" Javier asked quietly. "For now," Ava said. "He needs room. We can talk about reconstruction when he decides to stay." She placed the bone flap in a sterile container marked with Reed's name and the date. Lily labeled it, then handed it off to a tech for refrigeration. They closed the scalp in layers. The last stitch slid through skin with a soft, familiar resistance. Ava tied it off and cut the tail. "Time of closure?" she asked, voice low. Lily glanced at the wall clock. 4 hours, 11 minutes from incision, she said. Ava straightened slowly. Her back protested. The room felt suddenly larger, as if someone had opened a window. Singh adjusted the ventilator, watching the numbers. "Blood pressure is holding at 100/60, he said. "Heart rate 90, respiratory status as expected." "Thank you," Ava said. She looked up just once toward the gallery. Through the reflection on the glass, she could see Cole still standing at the front. His face was not easy to read from this distance, but he was no longer leaning away. Their eyes met for a brief second. He inclined his head by the smallest amount. Then Ava looked away. "Let us get him to ICU, Isvaishie. Lily, can you do a quick once-over on the lines and dressings?" "On it," Lily replied. As the team began the practice dance of transferring a fresh post-op patient, Ava stepped back from the table. She peeled off her outer gloves, then the inner pair fingers, leaving damp prints on the cuff. Her hands were pale where the gloves had pressed them small crescents of redness at the base of her fingers. She felt for the dog tags through her scrubs again, the metal pressed against her skin warm and solid. In her chest, her own heart finally started to slow to a normal pace, matching the steady beeps that marked General Nathan Reed's fragile, stubborn return to the edge of life. The ICU at night had its own kind of weather. Monitors glowed in blues and greens, casting soft halos over sleeping faces and motionless limbs. The air smelled like plastic saline and something faintly metallic that never quite washed out of the vents. Footsteps were softer here, voices lower. 2 days after the surgery, Ava sat at a computer workstation just outside the neuro ICU bay, reading lab results off a screen that had started to blur at the edges. Her eyes felt gritty. She forced herself to blink, then focused again on the numbers in front of her. Behind her, a monitor beeped faster for 3 seconds, then settled again. Someone laughed quietly near the far nurse's station. A cart squeaked. "Dr. Morgan?" She looked up. Nurse Carla Jensen stood in the doorway of Bay 4, her expression alert. "General Reed is showing signs of waking, Yellow," Carla said. "Reflexes are improved. Pupils are reactive. He is starting to move." Ava was on her feet before Carla finished the sentence. The chair rolled back with a soft scrape. "Any agitation?" Ava asked as they walked. "Just some grimacing and attempts to open his eyes," Carla said. "Sedation has been light for the last few hours per your orders." They stepped into Bay 4. The curtain was half drawn. Inside, Reed lay propped slightly upright as if the bed itself was unsure which way he would go. The ventilator had been exchanged for a lighter setup. A nasal cannula fed oxygen under his nose. His chest rose on its own now, with the machine only assisting when needed. His head was wrapped in a clean dressing. Beneath it, his skull was incomplete. The swelling had gone down some, but his face still carried a soft puffiness that gave him an oddly younger look. As Ava approached, his eyelids fluttered. "General Reed," she said, her voice steady. "This is Dr. Ava Morgan. You are at Lone Star Military Medical Center in San Antonio. You had an accident. You underwent brain surgery." His eyes opened to fraction hazel irises, unfocused against the stark lighting. He blinked slowly. The muscles in his jaw worked as if he had to remember how. Carla checked the vitals. They held. A resident stood quietly near the back of the room with a clipboard, trying to look invisible. "Sir, can you hear me?" Ava asked. Reed's gaze drifted, then found her face. For a moment he looked at her the way new patients often did, with the vague curiosity of someone trying to connect a name to an unfamiliar set of features. Then something shifted. The unfocused haze in his eyes cleared just a little. His brow creased. His stare sharpened, moving over her hair, her eyes the line of her jaw. Recognition did not slam into place. It assembled itself piece by piece. He swallowed. The sound was rough in his throat. "Commander," he said. The word came out cracked, barely louder than a whisper, but it filled the room. Carla froze with her hand on the IV pump. The resident's pen hovered above the page. Ava kept her expression neutral, though her pulse jogged. "You have been through a significant injury, General," she said. "You may have some confusion. I am Dr. Morgan." Reed gave a small stubborn shake of his head. "Commander Morgan, he said again. His voice was stronger on the second attempt. "Bravo Field Surgical Unit, Helmand Province, winter of 2018. The air in the bay seemed to grow heavier. Even the machines felt as if they were listening. A memory came back to her without warning. Cold air in a canvas tent. Sand tracked in on the floor, turning dark when blood hit it. Radio chatter in the background. A young officer with Reed's eyes lying on a stretcher, shrapnel lodged in his neck and skull, asking about his squad with a voice that shook. Ava had not known his last name at the time. They were all call signs and first names in that particular storm. "My nephew," Reed said. His face tightened briefly. "Lieutenant Ryan Cooper. He told me about a surgeon who stayed when everyone else pulled back." Carla looked from Reed to Ava, confusion written plainly across her face. "You refused evacuation," Reed went on. He had to pause between phrases, now pulling in air as if he was climbing a hill. "Mortars were hitting the airstrip. Command said you had to go. You told them you would not leave men on tables." "General," Ava began, "this is not a conversation you need to be having right now. You have just woken from a major operation. Your brain is still recovering." He lifted his hand, the movement slow but determined, and reached for her. His fingers brushed her forearm, then curled there like an anchor. "No," he said. "I need to say this while I can." His eyes met hers. "You saved his life in that bunker," he said. "You saved mine here. I know the face that stood over him. It is the same one that was above me in that operating room. I would know that voice in the dark." The resident at the back had stopped pretending to write. Carla drew in a breath and let it out soundlessly. A shadow passed across the curtain. Dr. Cole had stopped just outside the bay. He stood at the edge of the sightline, one hand still on the curtain, as if he had meant to enter and then changed his mind. From where he was, he could see Ava, and Reed could hear the words. Ava glanced once toward him, then looked back at Reed. "I was one surgeon among many," she said quietly. "Any of them would have done the same." Reed gave a small snort that was almost a laugh, and then winced as the movement tugged at his head. "That is not what my nephew said," he replied. "He told me you worked for 3 days straight, slept in 20-minute snatches on a stool, refused to abandon the wounded when the perimeter was in doubt." Ava felt her jaw tighten. The memory was clear. The way the tent had shook with each near impact, the metallic taste of fear in the back of her throat, the way she had pushed it aside by counting heartbeats and breaths. "You broke orders to stay," Reed said, "because walking away did not fit with whatever code you carry around under that coat." He let his hand fall back to the bed, spent from the effort of talking so much. The monitors near his head ticked along, numbers holding. "You can rest now," Ava said. Her voice was softer than it had been in the operating room, but no less firm. "There will be time for stories later." Reed studied her for a long moment. The lines at the corners of his eyes deepened, not with pain, but with something like respect. "Do not let them forget who you are, Commander," he said. "Not here, not in this place." He closed his eyes, the effort having cost him. His breathing settled into a steady pattern. Ava stood at the foot of the bed for a few seconds longer, watching his chest rise and fall. Then she stepped away. She found Cole still by the curtain. Up close, the light from the monitors in the adjacent bay painted his face in alternating green and blue. It highlighted the age in his features, the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "Commander," he said. The word was cautious, as if he was testing how it felt. "Ava is fine," she replied. There was no triumph in her voice, only fatigue. For once, Cole did not have a ready response. He nodded once and let her pass. Word moved through the hospital in the way it always does, through quiet conversations at nurses' stations, hurried whispers in elevators, a headline glimpsed on a phone while waiting for coffee. "General Nathan Reed wakes after near-fatal crash," one article said. "Miracle brain surgery credited at Lone Star Military Medical Center." The photos were of Reed. The story, though, kept circling back to the surgeon who had opened his skull when others would not. Old deployment pictures began to surface. Someone in public affairs had dug up images from Helmand. In grainy shots, Ava appeared younger and thinner, eyes sunken with exhaustion, hands deep in a wound while a corpsman held a flashlight. Her hair had been stuffed under a cap. Her expression had been the same as it was now when she worked. Focused, present. Within a week, a formal invitation arrived from Washington. The ceremony took place in an auditorium at the Pentagon that smelled faintly of polished wood and old speeches. Flags lined the stage. Rows of chairs were filled with uniforms, some bristling with ribbons, others still crisp from recent issue. Hospital administrators from Lone Star sat together in the middle rows, looking slightly out of place in their suits. Ava stood backstage in her dress whites, the fabric stiff at the shoulders. The uniform fit differently now than it had the last time she had worn it. The collar pressed against her neck in a way that was both foreign and familiar. Her dog tags lay flat beneath the cotton, resting against the spot over her heart where they had always lived. When her name was called, she walked out into the bright stage lights. The applause was immediate and full. It rose from the first row of enlisted personnel up to the back wall, where the sound bounced and came back. Ava felt it more as a pressure on her skin than as individual claps. General Reed sat in the front row. He was in dress uniform again, a cane resting against his knee, A faint indentation at his temple showed where bone should have been. He watched her with clear eyes. At the podium, the Surgeon General of the Navy adjusted his notes. Commander Ava Elizabeth Morgan, he said, his voice carrying easily, distinguished herself through extraordinary surgical skill under extreme conditions, both in combat zones abroad and in a stateside emergency where conventional judgment deemed success impossible. Screens on either side of the stage displayed images as he spoke. A shot of the crash site near San Marcos, a scan of Reed's shattered skull, a blurred photo from a field hospital canvas walls and a line of stretchers. In Helmand Province, he went on, she provided life-saving care under fire, refusing to abandon her patients despite direct orders to evacuate a threatened facility. At Lone Star Military Medical Center, she carried that same resolve into an operating room, accepting full responsibility for a procedure that others believe futile. He turned from the microphone and took a small medal from an aide. On behalf of the Department of Defense and the United States Navy, he said, "It is my privilege to award Commander Morgan the Medal of Medical Valor." The medal was cool against her uniform when he pinned it to her chest. For a heartbeat, she was aware of the weight of it, the exact pressure of the pin through fabric. The Surgeon General stepped back slightly. Effective immediately, he said, his tone now more formal, Commander Morgan's commission as an officer in the United States Navy is restored with full honors and rank. The room stood. The sound of chairs scraping back and boots hitting the floor echoed in the vaulted ceiling. Ava found herself looking out over a sea of faces, some known, most not. For a second, she thought of the stretch of sand outside the field hospital in Helmand, the endless tan of it. The contrast between the two landscapes made her feel slightly unsteady. She gave a small nod, not really a bow, then stepped away from the center of the stage. Afterwards, the formal reception blurred into a series of handshakes, half-remembered names, phrases of congratulations repeated so many times that they lost their edges. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked. When she finally found a moment to herself, she was standing near a side exit, one hand on a cool concrete wall, her head tipped back for a breath in relative quiet. A throat cleared nearby. "Commander Morgan." She turned. Dr. Cole stood a few paces away. He looked different out of scrubs thinner in a tailored suit, but his posture was the same, hands lightly clasped in front of him, shoulders set. Up close, his expression did not carry the authority it usually did in the OR. It carried something closer to hesitation. "Congratulations," he said. "Thank you," Ava answered. He looked past her for a moment as if choosing his words from some invisible list. "When you arrived at Lone Star Hishowani, he said slowly, "I saw someone who did not fit my picture of what an attending neurosurgeon should look like. Young, new to this particular system. I assumed that meant you were untested." He gave a short, humorless exhale. "I was wrong," he said. Yes, spectacularly wrong." Ava let the words hang there. The muffled sound of the reception bled through the closed doors, an indistinct wash of speeches and laughter. "Caution is not a flaw in our line of work," Cole added. "Judgment matters. So does knowing when you are out of your depth. I told myself that was what I was exercising with you. In reality, I was reacting to surface details." He met her eyes fully. "I owe you an apology, he said. "Not because the surgery succeeded. Because I did not bother to understand who was standing in front of me before I dismissed her." Ava studied him. The medals and ceremony had felt abstract. This felt concrete. "You were right about one thing," she said. "Experience matters. It is not a word you throw around lightly in an OR." She glanced down at the gleam of the new medal against her uniform, then back up. "I just collected most of mine in places that do not show up on standard applications," she went on. "Canvas tents, dirt floors, places where there were no backup teams when something went wrong." Cole's mouth twitched not quite a smile. "And in OR3, he said quietly, with a 4-star on the table. She let that sit for a second, then nodded. "In the end," she said, "all we really have to lean on are the choices we make when a patient is slipping and everyone else has already decided they're gone. That is where whatever you want to call experience shows itself." He inclined his head. "I see that now," he said. "For whatever it is worth, you have my respect, not as a commander, as a surgeon." "It is worth something," Ava replied. They stood there in a brief, strange islands of stillness in the middle of someone else's building. From the main hall, a burst of applause rose loud even through the doors. Somewhere in that room, Reed was probably telling the story of a bunker and a tent and a surgeon who stayed. Ava let her hand drift for a moment to the tags under her uniform. The chain pressed against the new old metal resting against new. Then she dropped her hands, straightened her shoulders, and walked back toward the noise and the lights. The conference room they gave her was one of the newer ones on the education floor. The paint was still bright. The chairs did not squeak when people shifted. A projector hummed quietly at the back, casting an image onto a white screen at the front of the room. Across the top of the slide, in plain black letters, someone in admin had typed the title she had given them. Beyond Protocol Decisions Under Fire. Below it, a photograph filled the wall. Canvas walls, cots lined up 3 deep, a blur of figures moving around tables lit by harsh yellow work lights, dust suspended in the air like a second skin. Ava stood near the screen in scrubs and a white coat sleeves pushed up. A half-circle of hospital staff faced her. Some in lab coats, some in scrubs, a few in uniforms. The room smelled faintly of coffee and dry erase marker. "I was 24 in this picture," she said. She did not raise her voice. The room was quiet enough that she did not have to. There was a mortar battery in the hills outside the wire. They were trying to find the range on the airstrip. They were not very good at it yet, which meant they were close sometimes but not close enough to stop flights. A few people shifted in their seats, most stayed still. "We were ordered to prepare for evacuation," Ava went on. "We had 6 patients on tables and another dozen waiting for surgery. Moving them in that condition would have killed them, so I did not start packing." She clicked the remote. The slide changed to a close-up of a pair of hands, gloved and slick with blood, working over a field that was more blur than detail. "Command repeated the order," she said. "I told them they would have to send someone else to clear the tent because I was not leaving without my patients." Someone in the back let out a breath between their teeth. Ava heard it and let it be. "We stayed 3 days," she said. "The mortars got better, then they stopped. The runway took some hits, so did the perimeter. None of the 6 on the tables died in that tent." She let that settle for a moment. "This is not a story about heroism," she said. "It is a story about a choice that violated written orders and put me at risk of a court-martial, a choice that felt at the time like the only one I could live with if I walked out of there." The front row held a cluster of residents. Their faces were young, their eyes tired. One of them, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a high ponytail, had a name tag that read, "Zoe Kim PGY 2. Zoe raised her hand. "Can I ask something?" she said. "Of course," Ava replied. Zoe hesitated for a second, then spoke in a rush. "How do you know when you are doing the right thing, and not just indulging some impulse to be the hero?" she said. "When you break a rule, I mean. When you go beyond protocol, how do you know you are not just being reckless and telling yourself it is for the patient after the fact?" A few heads turned toward her. It was the sort of question people thought and did not always say out loud. Ava nodded slowly. "It is a fair question," she said. She set the remote down on the podium and rested her fingertips on the edge, tapping lightly. 1, 2, 3. "In the field, there was one question I learned to ask myself before I ignored an order or bent a rule," she said. "Am I doing this for the patient, or am I doing this for myself?" She let her gaze travel across the room. If the answer when you are honest is that you are doing it to feel brave, or to avoid looking afraid, or because you cannot stand to admit that there really is nothing left to do, then you do not break the rule, she said. You take the hit to your pride and you follow protocol. Her voice stayed even. If the answer is that you have exhausted every standard option and you still see one more path that has a chance to give the person in front of you a life instead of a statistic, she went on, then sometimes, not always, but sometimes stepping outside the lines is the most ethical move on the board. Zoe sat back slowly. She did not look entirely reassured, but she looked like she was thinking. At the side of the room, the door opened quietly. A figure in uniform slipped in, trying not to draw attention. General Nathan Reed moved more carefully now than he had before the crash. A cane helped balance his weight. The line at his temple where bone was absent was nearly hidden by his hair, but Ava saw it. She straightened a fraction. "General Reed has agreed to speak with us today," she said, "about leadership, from his perspective." There was a murmur as people shifted to see. Reed made his way to the front, left the cane leaning against the wall, and turned to face the group. He moved like someone still mapping out a body that had changed on him without warning. He did not head for the podium. He stopped beside it instead. "I have spent a lot of years giving orders," he said. "Some of those orders sent people into places they did not come back from." The room quieted further if that was possible. "I used to think leadership was about rank and clarity," Bombauer said. "You wear the right number of stars, speak in the right tone, and people follow. I still believe in chain of command. The uniform on my back requires that." He looked at Ava briefly, then back at the group. But lying on an operating table on a machine with a team above my head, who had every logical reason to step away, I saw something I had never actually been underneath before, Kitikyo, he said. I saw someone stand between me and the easy outcome, knowing it might cost her more than it would ever cost him. He let that sit. Leadership, at least the kind that keeps people alive, is less about who signs the paperwork, Reed said. It is about who chooses to stand alone when stepping back would be safer for them personally. He gave a short nod, then reached for his cane. I will answer questions if you have them, he added. But that is really all I came to say. After the session, people drifted away in clusters, talking in low voices that were not quite the same as the ones they had used before the hour started. Zoe lingered near the podium, then slipped out when someone else caught Ava's attention. The weeks folded into months. Reed returned to limited duty at the Pentagon. Lone Star settled into a new normal where Ava's name was no longer followed by whispered qualifiers. She still came in early, still left late, still took the cases. Other people hesitated over. 1 year after the crash, the auditorium at Lone Star was full. The stage had been set with a simple lectern and a row of chairs. Banners with the hospital's emblem hung on the back wall. In the front rows, administrators sat with folders on their laps. Nurses, techs, and doctors filled the rest of the seats, some standing along the walls, when the chairs ran out. Ava sat on the stage in a plain dark suit, not in uniform. Her white coat hung over the back of her chair. The hospital commander stepped up to the microphone. Today, he said, we are here to recognize an appointment that reflects not only on Dr. Morgan, but on the work done in these halls. He spoke of the Department of Defensive Initiatives and advisory roles. The words flowed past Ava in a measured cadence. Dr. Ava Morgan has been selected as Special Medical Advisor for the Global Field Medic Initiative, he said. She will work with allied nations to train and support medical personnel in advanced trauma care in austere environments. There was applause. It was warm, familiar, less formal than Washington, more grounded. These were people who had seen her covered in sweat leaving OR 3 or slumped for 10 minutes over coffee at 2 a.m. When it died down, Ava stepped to the lectern. She looked out at the sea of faces. Some were the same ones who had whispered near the coffee machine her first week. Some were brand new. A few had their arms crossed, some had their hands folded, some just rested their elbows on their knees. When I came to Lone Star, I knew how old I was, she said. I knew what my CV looked like compared to some of yours. I also knew where my hands had been. A faint ripple of soft laughter moved through the room. This place measures experience in years and volume of cases, she said. There is sense in that. You do not put someone at the head of a service on faith. She paused for a heartbeat. What I hope we keep from this last year, she said, is not my story in particular. It is the understanding that sometimes the person who looks like they have the least time in the system may be the one who has stood in more hard rooms than you realize. She did not talk long. When she finished, the applause felt less like a wave and more like a lot of individual hands, each with its own weight. Later, when the crowd thinned, she slipped away down a side corridor. The new wall was in a quiet hallway near the chapel. Brass plaques arranged in neat rows, each with a name and a set of dates and places. At the top, engraved letters read, Wall of Quiet Valor Medical Personnel in Combat. Ava walked along it slowly. Some names she recognized. Others meant nothing to her personally. Just letters and numbers attached to theaters of war she had read about in reports. She found her own plaque near the middle. Morgan Ava E. Helmand, Kandahar. Lone Star Medical Center. She touched the edge of the brass with her fingertips. It felt cool and smooth. The letters were cut deep enough that she could feel them even with her eyes closed. Commander Morgan. The voice behind her was tentative. Ava turned. A young woman stood a few steps away, clutching a folded white coat over one arm. Her hair was still damp from a quick shower. The badge clipped to her collar read, MIA Lewis, PGY81. Mia looked like she might bolt if anyone spoke too loudly. Yes, Ava said. She offered a small smile. Dr. Morgan works fine. Mia shifted the coat in her hands. I'm starting my residency here next week, she said. I drove in today to do some paperwork and I saw the notice about your appointment. I hope it is all right that I stopped you. It is, Ava said. What can I do for you, Dr. Lewis? Mia hesitated, then let the words spill. I have wanted to be here since I knew what neurosurgery was, Casey, she said. I worked so hard to match. And now that I am actually about to walk onto the floor, I am terrified no one is going to take me seriously. As she glanced down at herself, then back up. I look young, she said. I am young. I am the only woman in my intern class. I keep thinking I will walk into a room and they will assume I am there to take notes, not hold a retractor. Ava listened without interrupting. Mia's voice shook, but she kept going. I guess I'm asking if it gets better, Mia finished. Or if you have any advice on how not to feel like you are always trying to prove you belong. Ava thought of the coffee room conversations of Cole at the head of the table of the first time she had scrubbed in and quietly saved a field without anyone saying her name. I cannot tell you what people will assume when you walk into a room, Ava said. They will bring their own histories to that. You do not control it. She glanced back at the wall, then at Mia. Do not let them decide your worth based on the year you were born or on what they expect a surgeon to look like, she said. Make them measure you by the way you show up when someone needs you, by the choices you make when the easy thing is to step back. Mia swallowed, eyes bright. That sounds hard, she said. It is, Ava replied. It is also the only measure I have found that holds up from place to place. Mia nodded slowly. Thank you, she said. I am glad you are here. So am I, Ava said. She watched Mia walk away down the hall, white coat folded like a flag in her arms. Outside the courtyard in front of the main entrance was washed in late afternoon light. The Texas sky stretched wide and pale, a few thin clouds drifting lazily across it. The flag at the center of the lawn snapped in a mild breeze. General Reed stood near the flagpole, one hand resting loosely on the handle of his cane, though on level ground he did not seem to need it as much. He was watching the sky with a small private smile. You found the wall, huh? He said when Ava joined him. I did, she said. They carved deep. And he nodded. So people do not forget him, he said. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the soft flapping of the flag, the distant sounds of traffic beyond the base fence, the faint hum of the hospital behind them. The Navy could use more officers like you, Reed said. People who do not forget what they learned when things were loud. Ava looked at the flag, at the way the cloth moved against the blue. I do not know if the world needs more commanders who could that. Ishi, Ma said, I think it needs more people who believe every life in their care is worth fighting for, regardless of who that person is. Reed considered that, then nodded once. Fair enough, he said. He said. A helicopter was lifting off from the pad in the distance. Its rotors blurred into a circle sound rolling across the grounds like low thunder. The vibration touched the soles of Ava's feet, climbed up through her bones. Her hand rose to her collar fingers, finding the outline of the dog tags under her shirt. The metal was warm, pressed flat between fabric and skin. She did not close her eyes. She watched the helicopter grow smaller against the sky until it was a speck and then nothing. Beside her, the flag snapped again, then settled. Ava let her hand fall back to her side. Then she turned from the lawn and walked toward the hospital doors where the lights were bright and the hall smelled like antiseptic and coffee, and somewhere a monitor was beeping in a rhythm that still meant the same thing it always had. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.